Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, July 19th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Vice President Mike Pence ahead of the 2024 presidential election and whether or not he is a viable contender at this point in time. Mike Pence, according to this Politico article, flatlines as the 2024 field takes shape. They spoke with people around the state of Iowa and other parts of the country, pretty much, I guess, to different people, discussing Mike Pence's chances of winning in 2024, more specifically in the Republican nomination. Now, as soon as I saw this article, I rushed over to the 2024 presidential election Wikipedia page, and one name that I did not notice on this other potential candidates or even declined to be candidate list was Mike Pence. I thought this was quite fascinating, the fact that Mike Pence wasn't even on any of these lists as a potential candidate in the Republican Party. I don't know entirely why they haven't included him in here. Maybe it's because there hasn't been as much media speculation or as many people fueling media speculation such as Ron DeSantis or Larry Hogan or other types of representatives and senators, but his name and I guess absence altogether was quite surprising. But when you take a look at the Republican Party primary polling data, you'll notice that against President Trump, Mike Pence really never had a chance. Mike Pence at one point in his peak polled at 18% against Donald Trump. Other than that, the last time was in November 2020, 22%, 19%, right after President Trump had lost and his support was at the lowest amongst the GOP. More recently, Mike Pence is polling at 8%, 10%, 13%, compared to the president's 48%, 57%, 55%. And when President Trump is not included on the ballot, while it used to be Mike Pence able to win these polls pretty consistently, 31, 30, 26, 44, 20, 22, 21, 21, 41, all of a sudden, mid-February, Ron DeSantis swoops in out of nowhere and ends up taking the lead. And then, every few other polls, Ron DeSantis takes the lead over Mike Pence. For instance, one shows him ahead without Mike Pence even on the question itself. Then he's down 6 points. Then he's down 2 points. Then he's up a point, down 5 points, up 4 points, up 25 points, up 8 points, down 1 point, up 5 points, up 7 points. So you'll see here that the trend used to be strong for Mike Pence, which we can actually see here in graph form. You can see that Mike Pence in this aqua color started out with a strong advantage and started dipping down and now is currently below Ron DeSantis by a pretty consistent amount. Otherwise, used to be the last time we looked at these polls together on my channel, Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis were neck and neck. So this question about Mike Pence being completely out of the question for 2024, a lot of it I think is fueled just due to the lack of media attention and much more polling data starting to show that Ron DeSantis is now the face of the GOP if it isn't President Trump. Ron DeSantis actually speaking today at the conservative event down in the state of Florida, speaking in Tampa, as a very well-known figure, someone who was invited and treated as, they put it, America's governor. So Ron DeSantis has this reputation within the GOP as a strong and formidable opponent towards Joe Biden and Democrats across the state of Florida and across the country. And based off of articles such as this one and new polling data from a number of Republican internals, Ron DeSantis seems to be the clear favorite when President Trump isn't there. It says that Trump remains the clear leader of the party. If he decided to run again for the president in a crowded 2024 primary field, he would get roughly half the vote, with DeSantis at a distant second place at 19%, which means these 19% of voters prefer DeSantis over President Trump. Everyone else, including Vice President Mike Pence, would be in single digits. Then they went ahead and polled the crowded 2024 primary poll, asking about whether or not people will vote for will vote for Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Rand Paul, etc. in this situation in which Donald Trump decides not to run. It says here that without Trump running, the poll shows DeSantis gets 39% of the vote and Pence at 15%. Not only is it DeSantis with a large lead or lead altogether, it's more than double what Mike Pence has in terms of support. According to this article here, a 22-point increase for the governor, referring to Ron DeSantis. Yes, Mike Pence used to be a governor, and a 4-point decrease for former Vice President Mike Pence. So I find this to be quite fascinating that Mike Pence went from being what was largely viewed as the front runner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination prior to the electoral certification if Trump was not to run, to being neck and neck with Ron DeSantis. And now Ron DeSantis seems to be leading consistently and taking away votes from Mike Pence and redirecting a lot of that Trump energy towards his campaign. If Trump is at 50% and DeSantis is at 39%, it's very clear here that a lot of that Trump support is also support for Ron DeSantis. And keep in mind, in 2016, Donald Trump won the primary with just 44% of the vote by the end of it. Even when everyone else dropped out and he had all of these opportunities to boost his popular vote numbers, which he absolutely did, he only finished with 44% of the vote. So if Ron DeSantis is only 5 points off of that 3 years ahead of time, he is in good company. And if you're looking at the political betting markets asking about whether or not Mike Pence will even run for president altogether before the end of 2022, the chances and the expectations for many people are low. But Mike Pence doesn't need to run before the end of 2022. But if you're taking a look at the way that the public looks at Mike Pence, you'll notice that at least in the betting markets, they don't expect much from him and his campaign. Let's see if we can find here. They're asking, does Mike Pence file before 2023? It seems that the no is 86 cents. Not to say he has to file before 2023, but that would be something before 2022, but that would be something that might be a potential boost for Mike Pence in this race itself, just because his name is out there early and not as many people would be willing to run against the former vice president. And then when you take a look at the 2024 numbers, who will win the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, Mike Pence's numbers are as low as 5 cents for a yes share. They've never been too high in the past 90 days, but you will notice that in the past 90 days, asking that question, will Mike Pence run for president, the numbers were higher, closing at one point at 20 cents for a yes share. If you were to treat that as a percentage of chance, it was a 1 in 5 chance. Now it stands around 1 in 7. And even then, it seems that people don't even expect Mike Pence to win this election later on in the primary. He's ranked even lower than Nikki Haley, ranked lower than Kristi Noem, ranked tied with Ted Cruz, just barely above Tucker Carlson, a conservative host on Fox News, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, right there with the rest of these people, but he's behind Noem, he's tied with Cruz, he's behind Haley, he's behind DeSantis, and of course, he's behind Trump. And the reason for this might be tied into a large portion of the Republican electorate that just doesn't view Mike Pence in a favorable way anymore. It says here that one Iowa GOP official says some people believe that Mike Pence is the Antichrist, and these are Trump supporters. And when asked about whether or not they believe he would win, they say, I don't imagine he'd have a whole lot of support. There are some Trump supporters who believe he's the Antichrist. He did a good job as president, but, there's still a significant portion of the Republican electorate that just does not like him. And then when asked about the former chief of staff, or the chief of staff to the former Iowa governor, Terry Branstad, Doug Gross here, says when asked about Trump, it's just where would you place him? With Trumpsters, he didn't perform the way they really wanted him to perform, referring to the electoral certification and confirming the election results as the vice president, so he's disqualified there. Then you go to the evangelicals, and they have plenty of other choices. So when you look at the reasoning provided by many of these people throughout Iowa and political operatives across the state and around the country, when asked about Mike Pence on the Republican side, essentially they don't have as positive a view of him as they used to. And it makes sense. Immediately following the Capitol insurrection, I mean, this poll was taken 3 days after the insurrection and the electoral certification. You will see here that while Vice President Mike Pence has a higher approval rating of President Trump, and to this day, this holds. The reason for that is because of the approval rating amongst Democrats and independents. Amongst Republicans, however, Donald Trump takes the cake and leads Mike Pence in terms of how Republicans view him. So the reason for this, I think, largely is due to the fact that Mike Pence confirmed the election results in the 2020 election. He was able to say that the results were free and fair, that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States at the time, and thus independents positively responded to such a statement. Now, it wasn't some type of major declarative statement for the Republican Party to have people. There were Republicans out there who did say that Joe Biden did win the election, but for the vice president of the United States, the second man for President Trump, to not even try to contest the election results, that was when people started to realize on the Democratic side and on the side of the independents, the more centrist-leaning members of the American political system, then they started to view Mike Pence in a more favorable way and didn't closely associate with him as much as President Trump within the Capitol insurrection. And President Trump even, back in 2016, when he chose Mike Pence as his vice presidential nominee, there wasn't exactly so much enthusiasm behind this pick. But then once he was chosen, it was very clear that Mike Pence was using this as a stepping stone. Well, now, as you can see in these numbers amongst Republicans, Mike Pence's numbers dwindled. Amongst independents and Democrats, sure, it went up, but these aren't the people voting in that primary. And I think it also went down largely due to the fact at this point in time because of President Trump saying that Mike Pence did not have the courage to overturn the election. This was right after the Capitol insurrection, saying that Mike Pence, actually right around the time that it was about to occur, so I believe right before, stating that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what Donald Trump viewed as needed to be done, that Mike Pence did not overturn the elections as he should have in his view. In his warped idea of what should have happened in the 2020 election, President Trump essentially berated and attacked Mike Pence over such a trivial issue, knowing that Mike Pence, as abided by the Constitution, went ahead and certified the election results, but there was nothing in the Constitution that gave the vice president the sole power to even overturn the election results. But it's very clear here that people don't view Mike Pence truly as viable at this point. To put him in the same boat as Mike Pompeo, to put him in the same boat as Ted Cruz, heck, even Tucker Carlson. It's fascinating, but it's upsetting for Mike Pence knowing that he was someone who was a congressman, a governor, the vice president, and yet nobody even views him on the Republican side as a formidable candidate, someone who could actually win that primary and consequently win the election if he rides that wave of some type of popularity amongst the American public. But the polls went from being strongly in favor of Mike Pence early on, and then it was like a switch flipped. It was all of a sudden the public turned against, at least the Republican public turned against Mike Pence in 2024. While it still shows here that many people still approve of Mike Pence, it's not enough to say that that is their clear favorite. As that one GOP operative said, evangelicals have options, and full-on Make America Great Again portions of the Republican Party are not going to be too keen on choosing Mike Pence as their first choice in the Republican nomination. I'm sure they would back him in a general election, but to put him up against Ron DeSantis, to put him up against Nikki Haley, to put him up against many other Republicans, including the likes of Donald Trump Jr., Ted Cruz, you will start to see Mike Pence dissipate. And that's exactly what we've seen for quite some time now. The polls went strongly in favor of Mike Pence, then down to not being in favor so much of Mike Pence, back and forth, and as it stands now, the numbers are beginning to turn more and more away from Mike Pence. It seems to be a field that's shaping up to be a race between DeSantis and between Trump. And even if it isn't those two matchups, if Trump isn't running, I can tell you now, DeSantis is going to ride this early wave of popularity, this recognition that he's receiving on the nationwide level, to a very strong start in the 2024 Republican primary, which is going to be very contentious, especially if President Trump decides not to run. And to say that Pence has flatlined as the 2020 field takes shape, I do agree with this. While Mike Pence is polling in a consistent second or third amongst the Republican Party, flatlining is the right answer. It is the right term to use when describing his not so serious campaign, but the discussion about whether or not Mike Pence can win in 2024 in this Republican primary. He started out strong, fluctuating up and down, but now it seems to be, rather than flatlining, more so of a downward trend towards less and less support nationwide, potentially around, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie type numbers by the 2024 Republican primary season. If you remember back in 2013 and 2014, I don't know how many of you guys were politically active. I personally was not closely watching the polls, but when you take a look at the historical polls, you'll see that Rand Paul had a lead for months during the Republican primary during 2013, 2014. Chris Christie had leads for months. Jeb Bush had leads for months, and all of these people didn't even crack double digits by the end of the 2016 primary. Didn't even come close for any of them, especially those recognizable names such as Chris Christie, Rand Paul, and Jeb Bush. Donald Trump really took away by winning through pluralities. And that's exactly what Ron DeSantis is doing right now. But Mike Pence, flatlining, I think that is the right word for it. To look at his numbers to see how quickly they have dissipated, to see how the Republican Party in itself has turned on him. Yes, while Mike Pence stands in second or third place amongst the rest of the candidates, it's only going to move downward from here. And we will see it happen over the next couple of months, the next year and a half, the next 2 years, to start to see how more and more people closer to President Trump will start to rise in the polls, while recognizable names such as Mike Pence and others will tend to dissipate if they further distance themselves further than they are doing already from the former president, because currently speaking, the Republican Party is still the party of Trump. He holds a strong grip on where they go, on who they support, and I can tell you now, Donald Trump's first option is certainly not Mike Pence. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.